Hi, this is Emerald, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking to you about how to break through your growth ceiling. So if you're somebody who's been stuck at the same level for a long time and you feel just really stagnant where you are, and you feel like you have a lot more potential to expand into, then this video is for you. And so I'm going to be reading off of these notes here and kind of going back and forth between the notes and my own experiences, and hopefully that makes it a bit easier for me to create more videos for you guys. So first off, what causes people to hit a growth ceiling? Well, the most common thing that causes people to hit a growth ceiling is attachment to outcome, having too clear of an idea of where the path is going to lead you. And the reason why this creates a growth ceiling is because the future path is uncertain by its very nature. So the more certain and the more locked in you get about what the future path is going to be, the more that you're going to be fighting against reality and basically missing a lot of opportunities for growth that might fall outside of the lens of what it is that you're trying to achieve. So I'm going to give you a couple of analogies here to explain what I mean. So let's imagine that you were going to go on a walk in the woods, and there was no path in this woods, so you were going to have to beat your own path if you were going to get through it. But you had already had a preconceived notion of what your path through the woods is going to look like. You're going to be like, okay, I'm going to take a right turn here, and I'm going to take a left turn there, and I'm going to go straight right here. Oh, and then there's going to be some rocks maybe over here that I have to climb over. But the problem with this is that when you actually go on your walk in the woods, after you've mapped everything out perfectly in your head, and everything's totally different, and so you're on your imagined path through the very real woods, and then you run into a tree, and then you keep trying to walk through the tree because you're like, okay, well, there should be a path here. And then it's like, oh, okay, maybe if I just try harder, I can walk through the tree. Or another analogy for this is if you've ever seen a bug, like a moth, try to fly through a closed window. So from the bug's perspective, it's like, okay, I can see into this space. I should be able to fly into it. And yet they keep going through the same cycle of just banging up against the glass and banging up against the glass. And if they could get a little bit more perspective, if they could zoom out a little bit, they might find that there's actually an open door just a couple of feet away. But because the bug feels certain that the right way to go is straight directly in front of them and they can see what the path is meant to look like, they just keep running back into the window again and again and again. And so like the moth in this analogy, our attachments and expectations for what the future should look like end up narrowing the aperture of our awareness, and we miss opportunities for progression because our mind edits them out. And ultimately what that does is it limits our scope of possibilities to only what our mind can imagine. And yet there are so many other paths that our mind couldn't have even fathomed of for our goals to come to fruition. And if you're in this pattern of attachment to outcomes and you're really stuck on the idea of, oh, this is exactly how success is going to come about, what happens is that success gets limited and the paths that you can get to success gets limited to just what your mind can currently fathom of. But there are probably thousands of paths that you can't even fathom of right now that could lead you to your goal and to even better places. And like the moth in the analogy, the barrier seems invisible. You just keep running into the same barrier over and over again, and you're not sure what the problem is. And we could even call this the glass ceiling or the invisible ceiling because it's our own expectations and attachments projected onto reality. So we might not even have the contrast to know that we are limiting ourselves because it might just seem like, oh, of course that's going to be the path. Of course that's the way that it's meant to be. So now you know that that invisible ceiling is caused by attachment to outcomes. What causes attachment to outcomes? Well, in a nutshell, we get attached to outcomes because we lack trust and faith in sources of power outside of ourselves. And so sources of power outside of yourself are things like a higher power, like God, or the universe, or other people, or luck, or synchronicity, or really anything outside of yourself that you don't have control over. And when we lack that trust and faith in sources of power outside of ourselves, we believe if I don't have complete control and certainty over future outcomes, things won't be okay. And if this is a pattern you're dealing with, it causes you to try to monopolize control, power, and responsibility over everything. And that becomes very overwhelming. And it feels like you have to be constantly trying and grinding to get things done. And if we lack trust in external power sources outside of ourselves, we'll become allergic to uncertainty, because uncertainty is something that we can't have, because that means that it's something that we can't control. And again, if we can't control things, that means that things will go badly. But the reality is that none of us have complete certainty or control over things happening in our lives. We don't know what the future is going to hold. And so certainty and control, it's only an illusion that we could ever have of those things. But in order for us to hold tight to the illusion of certainty and control like a security blanket, we can create a detailed map in our mind exactly about what all of the steps in the future are going to be and what it's going to look like when we achieve our goals. But this map is nothing more than a security blanket. It's a way of trying to project certainty into the future so that we feel more in control of the future. But it's our very grasping onto that imaginary future map and onto the illusion of certainty and control that narrows our aperture of awareness, and it blocks out all sorts of different potential tools and paths and techniques and totally new goals that we could use to bring ourselves into the lives we really truly want to live, where we're really reaching our full potential. And so this map of certainty can feel in the moment like a great comfort and like it's going to bring you a lot of success. But in actuality, it's capping your potential and acting as that invisible ceiling that's keeping you from getting to the next level in your life and in your work. Now, another thing that can contribute to this sense that you can just map out all of the future steps and know exactly what all of the steps are going to be and get really attached to those outcomes is that a lot of systems in our early life do work that way. So if we go through school, it's like, okay, we know we're going to first grade first, then second grade, then third grade, and so on and so on. And then when we enter the workforce, if we work in a particular organization where it's like, okay, first you start at an entry-level position and then you get promoted to here and then you go to manager and so on and so on. So that can give us the sense that our career path or our path for our goals in general is something that should be fairly linear and straightforward and predictable. But the reality is that your career, your life, your goals are going to be on a very unpredictable schedule. Like, you don't know what's going to come up in the future. Even if you're in a very, very straightforward career, you don't know exactly the twists and turns that your career is going to make. And so with this in mind, it's important to note there are really two main methods of wayfinding on your career path and your life path in general. And I call one of those the sun plan and the other one the moon plan. And so the sun plan is where the sun is out, right? Everything is illuminated. You can see 20 steps ahead of you and you know, okay, here's step 1, here's step 2, here's step 3, and here I'm going to eventually land on this vision right here. But then you have the moon plan. And when the moon is out, it's lit by the moonlight, and you can only ever see 1 or 2 steps ahead of you at a time. And so when you take a step, you take a leap of faith, and you're like, okay, I'm going to step in this direction because this feels like it draws me more. Okay, I take another step. Now a couple more steps are illuminated, and then I choose another step from there, and then a couple more steps are illuminated, and so on and so on. And so to wayfind with the moon plan, you have to be open-minded, you have to allow for ambiguity and uncertainty, and you really have to be able to operate in the moment off of your intuition to be able to tell which direction you prefer to go in at any given point in your journey. Now, it can be challenging to have a sense of direction with the moon plan, so it's really important that while you're on the moon plan, that you have a North Star value that you're following. So something that's really, really important to you. Like, for example, my North Star is mercy, and so even if I'm in a phase in the journey where there's a lot of uncertainty, I know that's the direction I'm moving in. I know that that's the impact that I want to have on the world. And both of these types of wayfinding are very important, both the sun plan and the moon plan. But what you'll find is that so often, in the whole, in the round, your career path, your life path will be so much more like the moon plan than the sun plan. It's just the fact that the future is totally unwritten. You're always going into the unknown. And so you have to be able to be open-minded and you have to be able to flow and to sort of roll with the punches as things come up. Otherwise, you're going to keep trying to project certainty onto an uncertain situation to give yourself the sense that you have control and that you're safer, but it's going to be highly ineffective because your projection isn't going to actually match the reality. So you won't be able to actually get any traction towards what it is that you want to do, and you're going to stay stuck in the mud. And embracing the moon plan is especially important for entrepreneurs and creatives who are looking to create a business from their art. And that's especially true with creative paths. So if you wanted to, for example, be an artist, or if you wanted to be a film director, there's no clear one path to take. What might work for one movie director, one artist, wouldn't work for another movie director and another artist. But the main thing that's going to keep you stuck hitting that invisible ceiling is if you keep trying to use your sun plan during a time when it's important to use the moon plan way of wayfinding. Also, now is the time when I'm meant to remind you to check out the webinar. That's 3 shadow work secrets to get out of your own way and reach your full potential without having to fight yourself. And the link is down below in the description box. I also have an application down below in the description box if you're interested in working with me. Now I'm going to share with you what it looks like on the path when you are attached to outcomes and what it looks like when you're on the path and not attached to outcomes. And when I share this with you, you'll understand why attachment to outcomes creates such a really difficult to break through ceiling. All right, so what does the outcome attached path look like? So this path operates off of attachment to the illusion of certainty and control. And again, that's like we don't actually have certainty and control, and so that really is just an illusion. And this creates and attaches to a granular, pre-tracked sense of how the future is supposed to play out, which of course none of us know how the future is going to play out. And it's also a very try-hard path with lots of white knuckling. So if you think about like white knuckling, it's like if we have attachment, it's like we're not receptive at all. So we have like this very, very intense, like we have to try really, really hard. But then if we actually are detached from outcome, we can open our hand, we can receive things more easily. And also in the outcome attached path, whenever resistance comes up, instead of saying, oh, that's interesting, let's get curious about it, it's something to battle with. It's something to fight against. So if you're trying to get from point A to point B and something is standing in your way, just move that thing out of the way. Try to be as forceful as possible to move through it. Try to get through it through brute force of will. Also, another thing about the outcome attached path is that it tends to operate more off of negative motivation than positive motivation because it's about trying to prevent things from going wrong. There's a belief that, oh, if I don't reach this goal and if I don't reach it in this particular way, then things are going to go wrong. And it's like, oh no, I'm not going to reach my full potential. Or, oh no, what if I don't make enough money? Or, oh no, what if I don't get the success that I'm looking to get? And so this involves us playing not to lose instead of playing to win. And again, that comes back to not trusting in sources of power outside of yourself. It's this sense that, okay, if anything is going to happen in my life, I have to be constantly in on top of it, making sure that it happens. Otherwise, everything is going to fall apart and everything is going to go bad. And this often comes from the belief that if we don't control our path entirely, that things just won't work out. And because of that, we end up operating off of have-tos and shoulds and obligations instead of want-tos. I would also describe this path as all will and no grace. And again, that comes back to not trusting in sources of power outside of oneself. So if, for example, we're on the river and we don't trust that the river is actually going to take us downstream, what's going to happen is we're going to be doing a lot of work trying to control that canoe and probably swimming upstream. And so if we think about will and grace with the river, we have the will in like the fact that we're still paddling the canoe down the stream, but then we have mostly grace because that is like what's pulling us forward. It's this force in nature, some power that's outside of ourselves, moving us down that river. And another thing that's important to note about being outcome attached is that it operates from desperation, and desperation repels opportunities. So if you imagine that you're going out on a first date with somebody and you're super desperate and you're super needy, what's going to happen is that person is going to be repelled. Whereas if you're detached and you're open-handed about things, then, maybe that gives more of an opportunity for a relationship to develop there. And the same thing tends to happen with opportunities in work and in life. Also, in the outcome attached path, we tend to be operating more from the logic mind rather than surrendering to more intuitive sources of inner knowing. So if we think about, we have the conscious mind and then we have the unconscious mind. The unconscious mind has a deep wisdom to it. But our conscious mind, it's very much a drop in a gallon bucket of all that we know deep down in the unconscious. And so when it's the case that we're trying to be so certain and, be so in control of everything, that's just a very, very small part of our knowing. And if we're actually so attached to knowing things with a sense of certainty, we can get detached from that deeper source of wisdom. And because it's something that we're not consciously aware of, we can actually count the unconscious mind as a source of power outside of ourselves. And that's where we can connect to that sense of grace. And a tendency in the outcome attached path is for people to start trying to build systems and to try strategies and techniques before actually finding inner resonance. I actually ended up in a pattern like this a few years back with my business, where I started to worry and get into like survival mode, like, oh, am I going to be able to make it in business and this type of thing. And I was posting short form content, which I really don't care for. And then I started a membership site that I just felt kind of like it just wasn't perfectly well aligned. And I was just trying out all of these different strategies because it was like, oh no, what's going to work? What's going to work? What's going to work? Again, operating from that sense of desperation and getting away from negative outcomes because I didn't trust it would work out. And also, when you're on the outcome attached path, what happens is that your attention gets laser focused. And while laser focused attention can be good in certain contexts, like let's say if you were let's say you had a project that you were working on and you had to be very focused in a certain way. So in certain contexts, this is good. But when it comes to actually moving forward on a fundamentally uncertain path, like your life path, or like let's say your career path over like the course of years, for example, if you get so narrowed in on laser focus, you miss all the potential opportunities that could come up if you're in this more diffusely focused state where you're like, okay, hang on a second, this thing comes up over here. It's not what I was imagining, but hey, let's try it out. Now, conversely, let's talk about the open-handed path. So if we just talked about the outcome attached path and how that's like a closed fist, this path is more open-handed, and there's trust that everything will be okay no matter what. And what that means is that even if things go poorly, that you trust that you will be able to handle whatever it is that comes up. And it's also helpful to be able to trust that you can turn losses into wins. So even if you experience some kind of negative situation, you can alchemize that into something more positive. And this path is more receptive and open-handed to new opportunities and paths of least resistance because there isn't as much white knuckling. Again, it's not a closed fist, it's an open palm. But then, of course, you still need focus and direction, and you still need work ethic, right? And so in this, focus and direction is created through having a clear sense of what your North Star value is. Like I said, my North Star value is mercy. Maybe yours is joy. Maybe yours is, like, let's say, having a certain type of impact. And so having that as your North Star gives you a sense of direction so that you can navigate the uncertainty of your path while still moving in a very clear direction. So to go back to that analogy of you're walking through an unbeaten path through the woods, what you have up in the sky is you have your North Star. You know which direction you're going in. And so what you have to do is then you have to just navigate your way through the woods and just feel your way through it and say, okay, there's a rock here. I need to go around the rock, or oh, hang on, there's a tree over here. So you're still leaving the path very open, but because you have this clear sense of direction, then you can navigate that path and not end up getting lost or not end up getting scattered in your focus. And on this more open-handed path, you also need that strong work ethic, but it's done in a more process-oriented way than an outcome-oriented way. So in the path with certainty, it's like, okay, we need to get to the summit of the mountain, and we need to make sure that we put all of our willpower into getting to the summit of the mountain. But in this case, it's more like it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game. So you develop systems and processes for yourself that are deeply aligned with your authenticity, and then that is just what you show up with every single day, almost in a way that's kind of like maintenance, but chipping away a little bit at a time at your goal. And so with that, you have a sense of direction and a generalized sense of focus that's also more diffuse and able to work with the situation. And you also have the practices to be an effective worker that moves you more and more in the direction of your North Star. And if you keep your awareness diffused, you can see all kinds of different paths that you could take through the unbeaten path through the woods. And in this path, it's not that there's 100% uncertainty. You might have specific desired outcomes that you want. Like, so for example, for me in my path, it's like, okay, I want to grow my YouTube channel. I want to be able to serve, like, let's say creative people and entrepreneurs to like help them be able to achieve their goals and to have this ripple effect on things. And so I do have some clearer goals goals, but I try to be very open-handed with them. And if things divert a different way, I ultimately trust that that is the forces of grace bringing me more into connection with what it is that I really truly want in my heart of hearts that my mind can't currently fathom of. So on this open-handed path, specific desired outcomes are held onto loosely, and outcomes are not forced. So if you feel like you're having to squeeze blood from a stone and you just keep trying and trying and trying to work things out and it just doesn't work, then you might need to find a new path or a new strategy through those woods. And most importantly, this path has to do with trusting in forces of power outside of yourself. It has honestly been the most powerful thing that I've done to start actively putting, let's say, power and responsibility into the hands of, let's say, forces outside of myself, like synchronicity, like the unconscious mind, like the higher power. And so I have a list over here. So synchronicity is a really good one. Those are sort of like coincidences that aren't coincidences. So the idea in Jungian psychology is that a synchronicity is where what's going on for you internally in the psyche is showing up in your external world. And so if you find that, let's say, the same concept keeps coming up multiple times, or the same image keeps coming up multiple times, or you have a dream about something and then that thing shows up in life, those are the things that you can look at and go like, oh, hang on a second, is this the trail of breadcrumbs that's leading me to what it is that I really want to achieve, what I really want to do? And I call this the path of the truest, deepest will. And I find that synchronicity really paves that path of the truest, deepest will. Or you could even think about it in terms of like a higher power, like God. So I oftentimes, let's say when I'm thinking about my path, which is inherently very uncertain. I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a YouTuber. It's like there's so much that's outside of the scope of my control, especially when it comes to like the YouTube algorithm and things like that. And so what I have to trust is that I have a truest, deepest will, something that I want in the deepest parts of me that I might not even necessarily consciously be aware of. And so what I trust is that whatever is happening is almost like God and the universe conspiring together to present me the exact situations in my life that will give me the ability to alchemize those situations in a way that my truest, deepest will come up. And it can come up in very surprising ways. So even if I experience something negative, I can go like, interesting, what's the universe got up its sleeve, or what's God got up his sleeve for me? And then I can start to work with those experiences in order to come even deeper into alignment with what it is that I want, and to course correct along my path without taking on so much weight and so much responsibility for everything to have to happen by me. And this also allows me to kind of decenter my ego and decenter myself, because hey, it wasn't like really all me that ended up solving this or figuring this out. Actually, there was all kinds of different help that I got from sources of power outside of myself. Now, I don't personally believe in luck myself. I do believe that everything is woven together very, very intentionally, a specific way, and for very specific reasons that human beings can't even necessarily fathom of. But if you believe in luck, it is also something that you can put sort of faith in and trust in as a power outside of yourself. And then very importantly, also being able to trust in a greater support system, being able to trust other people outside of yourself. And oftentimes, if we have a tendency to feel like we're the ones that have to make everything happen all the time, it can oftentimes happen because we didn't have a very strong support system growing up. And so we had to do it all alone. And so being able to take some responsibility off of your plate and to share it with another person, and then, to have sort of you support them, they support you, that's a really important thing for this kind of path. And also, like I said, the unconscious mind is a power outside of yourself. So if you think about the part of you that makes executive decisions, again, it's a very, very small part of yourself. So your body is a power outside of yourself. Your instincts are a power outside of yourself. Your unconscious mind is a power outside of yourself. And there's a deeper wisdom to the body. There's a deeper wisdom to the unconscious mind. So I like to think about the unconscious mind a bit like an ocean. And when it comes to the conscious mind is like a surfer that surfs that ocean. And so the best thing that we can do is to realize that we're not in control of the ocean, and to allow the grace of the ocean to happen. And then our will can be like, can I become a greater surfer? That's where our will goes. But the grace is being able to lean into the ocean of the unconscious mind and the ocean of different energy levels and intuitions that happen within the body on a day-to-day basis, where, maybe our energy energy is really high one day, or maybe we're really tired the next day. And being able to surf those waves is really important for being able to have the grace piece of this. Also, the open-handed path has a lot to do with embracing the moon plan as a primary means of wayfinding. So especially if you're an entrepreneur or you're an ambitious creative, it's like there's not going to be a lot of certainty with those paths. You're going to have to go out into the woods and to beat your own path. And so it's really, really important for you to be able to embrace the uncertainty. Otherwise, that's going to be a very difficult thing to achieve. This path also operates from staying centered in your sovereignty and what you want, as opposed to desperation and moving away from what's unwanted. So anytime that you're operating off of a deeper want, you are connected to your sovereignty. Whenever you're projecting power outside of yourself and saying, oh, I have to do this, or I need to do that, or here's this standard that other people are expecting of me, or this is what my path is supposed to look like. When you're doing that, what you end up doing is you end up coming out of alignment with your sense of sovereignty, which is always with the question, what do I really want at the deepest level? What is my truest, deepest will? And to go back to the metaphor around canoeing down the river. So again, what I said before about the sort of white-knuckled path, or the outcome attached path that keeps you stuck and unable to go through to the next level. With that path, it's all will, right? So it's all paddling upstream all of the time. Whereas let's say if we take that same river metaphor, what we have with canoeing down the river and we're going with the stream, what we have is we have 10% will, 90% grace. And that's what's really helpful about trusting in sources of power outside of yourself. The more that you trust, the more that things can surprise you and take you exactly where it is that you would need to go. And whenever it's all will all the time and all control and all trying, what ends up happening is that you end up trying to swim upstream all the time and it just doesn't work out and you feel stuck because you're trying to canoe upstream. Also, on this path, resonance is established before strategies, systems, and techniques are tried. So you really want to make sure that everything sits well with your gut, everything sits well with your heart, everything sits well with your intuition and feels truly aligned before you actually start trying to do, let's say, oh, how do I scale this? Or how do I, build systems around this? Or oh, hang on a second, I want to go into business and maybe I should build this business and here, how do I do this technically? Because you can have that technically perfect. You can build the best funnel that there is, for your business. But if the business isn't fundamentally aligned with you, then you're going to run into a lot of friction and you're not going to be moving along the direction of your truest, deepest will. And again, you'll be swimming upstream. Also, on this more open-handed path, whenever resistance arises, instead of just trying to move past the resistance and trying to get to the outcome and trying to get all of that certainty, what we do instead is you can just get curious about the resistance. Go, that's interesting. There's a resistance there. How am I trying to protect or serve myself by having that resistance there? And maybe it's if that comes up for me, maybe I find that, oh, wait, hang on, maybe this isn't the most aligned direction. Maybe I need to go in a different direction. Or maybe it is an aligned direction, but there's just some uncomfortable feelings that I need to face with. And in facing with those uncomfortable feelings, being able to, let's say, experience that and to process through that maybe helps me get even more aligned with my truest, deepest will. And if it's the case that you're really attached to outcomes and you really have a super certain path, what's going to happen is that you run into resistance as you're just going to try to get past the resistance instead of actually going with the flow of the resistance and using that resistance to move you in the direction of what it is that you really truly want in your heart of hearts. So what is it that's necessary to shift to this more open-handed path? Well, in order to shift to the open-handed path and to break through your growth ceiling, it comes from your ability to trust and surrender in lieu of certainty and control. And there's a little bit of difference between what trust is and what surrender is. Surrender is the ability to let go even if we don't know things are going to be okay. It's the ability to say, hey, that is not in the scope of my control and therefore I am letting go of it. And so there's something very sobering about surrender in that way, because then we let go of the illusion of control and we realize, oh, I don't actually have control in this situation. situation. And trust, on the other hand, is a little bit lighter than surrender. Trust is the belief that things will work out okay, or even if things don't work out okay, that you will be able to handle it if things go wrong, or you can turn those losses into wins. And so some beliefs to adopt in order to operate through surrender and trust are to believe that, number one, everything will work out no matter what, or even if it doesn't work out, that you'll be able to handle it. And another belief is that which is meant for me will never miss me, and that which misses me was never meant for me. And oftentimes this quote is attributed to Bob Marley. Another belief is that there are benevolent forces governing my life that are wiser than my conscious mind. And so you can use this as like the unconscious mind, has like a more wisdom than the conscious mind. Or you could think about it as like, let's say, maybe there's some kind of like grace outside of yourself, a higher power, maybe the universe at large. And the idea that there's some kind of deeper wisdom that's going on there, a deeper lattice work of meaning within reality that is somehow superior in its knowing to what it is that you consciously know, so that you can surrender to it. And another one that I find particularly powerful is that every unwanted thing that happens to me arises because it is directing me towards the path of my truest, deepest will. So that's very similar to what I'd mentioned earlier. Is like, okay, I think about my relationship with life as being a relationship with a higher power, where that higher power creates my own reality for me so that I can experience whatever it is that I need to be able to experience what I came into this incarnation to experience. And that being my truest, deepest will, what it is that I really want at the deeper level, underneath my surface level will. And so if something unwanted happens, or my life takes a detour, or my goals don't work out in a certain way, I can then look at that and go like, that's very interesting. What's the underlying reason for that? How is that bringing me deeper and more into connection with what it is that I came into this life to experience? And if you adopt this, it's really helpful, because it's sort of like if life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. You go through this process of alchemy to turn these negative circumstances into more positive circumstances. And turning losses into wins is something that I find to be particularly helpful. And I find that in the times where I had the biggest jumps in my career and in my life, and just like the biggest shifts and changes, are times where I've experienced a big loss and had to change things around entirely because of that loss. And so these will help you surrender more so that you can break through that ceiling. But one of the things that's also really helpful here is to understand what it is that you're trying to avoid in the first place by trying to gain so much control and trying to latch on so much to outcomes. So for example, if I have all of these, like, let's say, attachments to, my career has to go this particular way, and then I look underneath that and I'm like, okay, what is it that I'm so afraid of? If that doesn't work out, then what am I afraid is going to happen? It's like, okay, maybe I'm afraid that I won't survive, or maybe I'm afraid that I'm going to disappoint somebody, or maybe I'm afraid that I'm going to end up all alone. Underneath these, like, let's say, attachments that we have, there's always some kind of vulnerability that's there that we're trying to protect. And so if you can ask yourself, how am I trying to protect or serve myself by attaching to this outcome, then that can be really helpful. For example, before I was doing what I'm doing now, I was very attached to the idea that I was going to become a school teacher, and I had this plan for like 20 years of my life, from like age 5 until 25, and I made that happen. And one of the things that I believed as a child is that, okay, I have to go on like one specific career track, and I have to make sure that I go to college, and I have to make sure that I work for somebody else, because if I don't do that, what's going to happen is that I'm not going to survive. And so there was always this sense of like, okay, I have to make sure that this works out, because otherwise there is nothing else for me, because I only have time to get one degree, and if I have a degree, that means I can do one job, and if that one job doesn't work out, then I'm done for. I'm not going to survive. I'm not going to make it in adulthood. And that just seemed like the way that the world worked. And so I was very attached to an outcome for 20 years that ended up not even being what I ended up doing, surprisingly enough to me. It's still a shock. And a lot of it was just based off of, I'm not going to be able to survive unless I do that. And then once you know what it is that you're trying to avoid, you then adopt the mindset, even if the worst case scenario happens, I trust myself to be able to handle it. Then I also have a list of other things you can do here. So one is like to decrease the importance of your desired outcomes, kind of take them off of the pedestal, to not feel like there's such a make or break thing. Like it's like being able to feel like, okay, if that didn't work out, I would still be fine. I'd be able to find something else that works out. Also discovering your North Star value. That's your primary value that you're trying to move toward when you're in that moon plan and you're trying to figure out which path ahead. And that way you don't have to get so locked in on particular milestones or particular achievements, and you can continue to move in a specific direction. And I actually have another video about that I'll tell you about in just a minute. And then staying grounded in your sovereignty and operating from want tos instead of have tos. So if you find yourself saying, oh, I have to do this or I should do that, instead shift to want tos. The more you stay centered in yourself and the more you stay with positive motivation, the more easily it is to break through your ceiling, because breaking through your ceiling is always going to be in the direction of your truest, deepest will, and is always going to move toward what makes you feel more expansive. Another thing you can do is to feel around for resonance or lack thereof. So if you don't feel the resonance and you try to act anyway, and you try to just put in the work and you try to build the systems and the funnels and the everything else based off of something that doesn't resonate, it's just not going to work out. Or even if it does, you're going to feel like you're trapped in something that you don't want to be in. And so with that, being able to test for resonance, does it sit well with your gut first before you try to move in that direction? Otherwise, you're just going to stay stuck, and worst case scenario, it does work out and you're even more stuck in something you don't want to be in. The next one is a fun one. So remain open to detours and synchronicities. I absolutely love operating off of synchronicity work. It's what makes life very interesting to me, and it's what makes my path as an entrepreneur also very interesting to me, because I can find little whispers, to me by the universe, and it helps me feel really interconnected with things, and it brings me to places that my conscious mind wouldn't be able to think of, because we have an element there that's totally outside of the control of my conscious mind, where I can actually respond to those things and I can find new opportunities, new angles of looking at things, and it's just a lot of fun. And also I found it to be very, very effective for finding the flow of my truest, deepest will. And you can think about synchronicities almost like a trail of breadcrumbs that leaves you to the level that you're at right now that's capped. And if you follow the synchronicity, you can move past that ceiling and you can get to the next level. Also, I highly recommend getting very curious about your resistances. Sometimes your resistances can show you where there's misalignment and can help you let go of certain elements that you've mapped out on your path that might not fit with you, that are holding you back. So for example, if you decided that, a year from now, I want to be doing this in my business, but it doesn't actually match with, what it is that you really truly want. It's just something that you put there because it felt like that's the right way to do it, or that's where you should be in a year. And so if you notice that there's no resonance there, then you can go hang on a second, is that actually what I want to do in a year? Or maybe do I want to try something else, something that's a little bit more aligned? And your invisible ceiling is oftentimes happening because you've gotten so much certainty, and that certainty is misaligned with what it is that you actually want, and misaligned with how the path actually goes in a practical sense. And so the more that you can get aligned with what it is that you want, success is ultimately a lot more likely to flow from aligned actions. And perhaps most of all, don't force it. If something is like squeezing blood from a stone, it's probably a sign that there's a misalignment issue, and that you're like that moth that keeps running into the window over and over again. And so if you are trying so hard to make something work that just isn't working, back up a little bit, see if there's another path, see if there's another way of going about it that's actually going to be more aligned with you and that's going to have more grace to it. Now, as I had mentioned before, it's really important to have a North Star so you have a sense of direction. And once you have direction, you can be more hands-off and more diffuse in your awareness as you move down the path. And so if you want to learn about how to find your North Star, I highly recommend checking out this video right here.